how to select the best components for your race car. That's what we're going through in this episode 3 of our er8 the tech series. So of course the definition of what is best will vary depending on what kind of a car you're building, or if it's even a car or just some completely other concept. But typically you would have, for instance, a race car's 3 aspects that you're looking at, so these are based on the previous episodes a little bit. So for a race car in episode 1 we went through that, what makes a race car fast. So we have some ideas of what the main parameters are that we're looking for. And in episode 2 we went through the kind of different tools and how to analyze the sort of how good components will be for your car. And so how do we figure out mass versus speed or goodness or whatever that would be versus price ratio for different components? And this is a extremely complex and difficult topic, but I think the easiest way to look at this would probably be to go through some examples from our er8 car and not try to do this analytically. I'm not even sure, I would not even be sure how to do a sort of analytical analysis on this, because the sort of design space and choices to be made is just so large that I don't think it's really feasible to do that, but there probably is some way to do that also. In this episode we'll be looking at the drivetrain selection for our er8 car. And when you start selecting stuff, of course you want to know what the important things are. So for the er8, it's the mass of the components is very important. How good the components are, so that would be in this regard. How well the gearing, for instance, is suited in the gearbox. How the power band on the engine works. How well the components should function. So that means basically how well tested they are, or how big of a likelihood there is of running into problems with these. And then of course the price. So for instance, on the engine, if we were looking at only, if you just choose any 2 of these components, then it's a very easy choice and it's not very, very difficult. So if you're only looking at mass and how good the components are, so for the engine you would just go for a V10 F1 engine or something like that, but that might cost you 10-20 million euros maybe. I have no idea if those would even be available, but I guess with enough money you could probably purchase those from one of the old F1 engine manufacturers. So the price, immediately explodes, for instance, if you are only looking at 2 of the components. So it's very important to look at the whole package together. And engine-wise, this is, I think, where the Thor engine, for instance, is extremely good. You can find engines that are lighter and are cheaper, but the goodness aspect is questionable. So, for instance, aftermarket tuning engines that you could get with very, very high boost pressures and smaller engines around the same power to weight ratio as our Thor engine. But then again, those are not OEM engines, so you spend 1-2 years developing that, and then after that you figure out, the valve seats just keep pushing into the cylinder head or something like that, and you're fixed on the design of that because you can't remanufacture it. So for that instance, the OEM aspect of the Thor engine is a very large goodness increase. But then again, if you're looking for only how good the engine is and its price, then you end up with a twin turbo V8 engine, for instance, that is very, very heavy again. So it's important to look at all of these aspects, and but I'm not going to get into too much details with the Thor engine, because if there is enough interest and we make it all the way to episode 6, that episode will be dedicated completely to our Thor engine, so more details on that then. And yeah, I mean, if you want us to make it all that way, then yeah, please leave suggestions and shares and comments and likes and dislikes, of course, also on these videos. And yeah, I mean, improvement suggestions are always welcome, and ideas on the content. But yeah, so the gearbox aspect then, if we're sort of more or less shortly convinced that the Thor engine is the best engine to go with, so what did we do with the gearbox on this er8 as a sort of, I think this should be a very good example to go through what we mean with this. So if you just go with what other people are using, then it's not really going to be good enough, because you need to do things, well, not necessarily differently, but better and more efficiently if you want to yeah, improve on existing racers and the status quo, so to say. And there's always margin for improvement, so it's not something to be afraid of or something like that. But of course you need to know and understand what you're doing, so that you're actually like improving stuff and not just doing something differently because you like doing things differently. That doesn't really give you any benefit. But yeah, for this engine, or for the gearbox, we started going through different options. First of all, what size the gearbox would be, so where it would need to be mounted, and if we would want to run a transaxle or not. So that's a gearbox with a built-in differential. And transaxle, of course, it's very easy to figure out that would be ideal. So you would want the gearbox at the back of the car with the differential to help spread out the weight distribution. And with this time attack stuff and the aerodynamic rules, you definitely want a front engine or sort of front mid engine to be able to create clearance for the ground effect tunnels. So we started looking at different transaxles that were available. And I mean, there are a lot of really yeah, good established manufacturers that make those. I mean, probably I would guess between 5 and 10 different manufacturers. Maybe if you really started digging into them, you can probably find 10 different ones. And there are, of course, for circuit racing, off-road racing, all kinds of different design parameters that will have different strengths and different weaknesses, and some will be more suitable than others. And of course, the market sort of price in the different categories will have a large influence on the price aspect, even though the sort of mechanically aspects might be very similar. Let's see if we can get this back. Yeah. So yeah, how do you sort of look at all of this? And yeah, well, just because the amount of different transaxles available was reasonably limited, so with the manufacturer's amount and how many different options the different manufacturers have, we looked at around maybe 10 different transaxle options, and we're in continued discussions, or more in-depth discussions with 2-3 manufacturers, I think. But none of those was really good in this mass and goodness and price aspect. So we did find one that was very close, but the price was a little bit high and the goodness was not really where we wanted it. So the gearing that they had available was not really there, and they would have needed to do a custom ring and pinion for us, which again would increase the price unless they would be interested to develop that. And we went a little bit back and forth with them, and there didn't really seem to be an interest for them to develop that on their own. So yeah, we basically ended up back to square one and tried to figure out what other options there might be. And so, I mean, criteria number one, of course, is it needs to be capable of handling the engine power, and criteria 2 is to be reasonably lightweight, or yeah, as lightweight as possible, basically, and yeah, cheap, or well, not cheap, of course, because they are racing components. But have a good sort of ratio of these 3 variables. So yeah, we started looking at some drag racing components and realized that okay, there are 3-speed drag racing gearboxes that will definitely hold for our 1,500 horsepower circuit racing power that we'll be pushing out with the Thor engine. Of course, for different use, the engine is capable of much more than that. But for sustained high power use, then 1,500 horsepower was our target. And there are definitely drag racing gearboxes capable of that. And we started looking at those, and okay, we found one manufacturer that does have a reasonably lightweight one. That is okay for 1,500 to even up to 2,000 horsepower with reasonably inexpensive internal components. And also depending on the gear selections a little bit. So they had the sort of the stock-based gearing was much cheaper than custom gear ratios. So okay, we started looking at that, and could we maybe get away with actually only using 3 gears, and would this suit the car or not? And we started looking a little bit into the engine power band and how much anti-lag we would potentially need to be able to run a very wide sort of RPM spread between the different gears. And we got some numbers from our engine simulation stuff, and on paper it seemed maybe doable. So going back to our episode 2, the only way to really know if you're going to make a large mistake or not is to run a simulation on that. And I could show you some data from that. So on the bottom section here you see the selected gear. So this is again at the Sydney Motorsport Raceway Park and from our Factor 2 simulation. So we put in the sort of stock-based gearing for the gearbox to see if that would be usable or not. We have gear 3 here, gear 2, gear 1. So this is into the turn 2 at Sydney Motorsport Park. So we're basically coming flat out through turn 1, shifting down to gear 2 and then down to gear 1. And this is so with slicks that the car is actually designed for. Racing in the World Time Attack Pro class, we're going to need to use A050s, and the tires are the sidewall especially is so much lower that it's not possible to run those at these full speeds. But we want to design the car, of course, to be able to run flat out. So that's what we're using for design criteria and comparison here. And so the biggest question mark was like coming out of turn 2 at a reasonably low engine RPM, will we have enough power there to be able to sort of normally aspirated have enough power out of the corner, or will we need to start dialing in anti-lag, and this will create more testing time and setup time and potential heat issues with exhaust manifolds, and we might need to use more expensive components for the exhaust manifold, which might take longer also to manufacture. So these are all considerations on looking at the anti-lag aspect. So we ran lots of simulations, and coming out of turn 2, the green plot here is the throttle position, and the red here is the engine RPM. So in this instance we're at 6,000 RPM on the engine, and our throttle is at about 80%. And we're just about starting to build boost here. We're coming up on the throttle quite quickly. And so in this case also we did a turbo model and a throttle response model on the engine that is sort of a worst case scenario. With actual ECU you can of course get a much better throttle response than what not necessarily like immediately visible from these curves, but it's has a very poor throttle response, but this can of course be improved with the pedal to power mapping on the ECU, of course. And so before we reach boost, we're not even at 100% power request from what the engine is capable of producing, so that seemed very good. And looking of course through the rest of the lap also, the situation is pretty much the same. So it looks really good, and that's what we have selected for the er8 now. And so looking at this basically means that okay, we found a solution that is mass-wise as good as the transaxle option we were looking at. The goodness is better than what we were able to find with the ready-made transaxle options, and the price point is much lower. So we're looking at probably around 50% or 35 to 50% of the cost of a transaxle, of a sort of circuit racing transaxle solution now with our gearbox and differential setup that we found. So that's a huge improvement on this overall sort of equation of these three variables. So yeah, the end result is, yeah, we're hoping to join these guys, so the RP968 and the Boosted 86 teams GT86 and Ekanu Racing on our Elmer Racing Boswell with our er8. We'll have to see how that goes, but yeah, we really want to make this as good of a car as possible and continue to work with the best suppliers that are also looking at these optimizing this sort of three variable system always. So yeah, the sponsors we have, or well, not really sponsors, more like technical cooperation partners or something like that. We don't actually have a single true sponsor, but yeah, Lightblocks are providing the battery for the er8 that is extremely lightweight. List price is high, but it saves so much weight in comparison with traditional batteries that the sort of weight savings per euro is actually very good on those batteries, and the technology is also extremely good on that. TurboSmart, yeah, they're well, working with them on selecting the best possible components for the wastegate, blow-off valve, fuel pressure regulator. I believe we have a filter also, oil pressure regulator for the turbocharger, and yeah, and looking at, okay, yeah, we want to use some components in a way they're not really intended for, and yeah, we've got excellent support from them and going through the technical aspects and what would they recommend for this, and this is something that is extremely valuable, because typically, I mean, manufacturers don't provide enough information so that you can figure out, can you use parts for something they're not really designed for. So yeah, then when you have a really good company that you can go back and forth with to figure this out, then that is just, I mean, extremely valuable. Elmer Technologies, that's the main encompassing sort of stuff behind our whole Elmer Racing effort. XMs, of course, the control electronics we're running, that's a brand we're working on, and some extremely exciting stuff going on with that. We'll see if we get to, which episode was that we were looking at? Yeah. If we make it to episode 8, there will be a lot more about the XM stuff. And yeah, the newest inclusion here is Bripar that we're working with for the brake and wheel hub upright assemblies for the er8, and looking at some custom stuff, and they're also extremely helpful. We're looking at the simulation data and, okay, how much energy do we need to dissipate and what kind of amount of time during the braking, and okay, do we have enough time to actually cool the brakes during that or not, or do we need to transfer all of that into the mass of the brake disc basically or not, and gone through all of these variables and looked at, okay, so this is the mass of the brake discs we need, and yeah, looking at them and optimizing the brake system with that, we basically have the weight as good or even better than carbon brakes, but using much more affordable iron-based alloys for the brake disc setup. So that is, I mean, a huge improvement. So we have saved so much money on other aspects of the car, and working on other things that will improve the performance further. So that's a huge aid, and also yeah, having sort of increasing the goodness aspect of that, so having the brake components and the uprights or hubs done, or design-wise done with the same company, is very important also, so that we can get this sort of whole package designed as good as possible and get the suspension mounting points sort of load transferred as close to possible to the brake caliper mounting points and all these kinds of design aspects. But yeah, hopefully we'll be able to make it on the boss wall with the er8. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, I'm Oscar from Elmer Racing, and this was episode 3 of our er8 The Tech series. See you guys hopefully in episode 4. Bye.